Good evening, everybody. Welcome to the European Studies Centre at St Antony's College. We have an incredibly exciting seminar for you this evening. So thank you very much for joining us, and of course, happy International Women's Day to everyone. We have an incredible speaker. Georgi Gospodinov is the International Booker Prize-winning author of Time Shelter. The novel is published in over 30 languages. The most exquisite kind of literature, says Olga Toskarev, the Nobel Prize-winning writer. The Guardian said the book could not be more timely. Gospodinov is a writer of great warmth as well as skill. In 2022, Time Shelter was the New Yorker, Guardian, and Financial Times Book of the Year. Georgi Gospodinov became internationally known then, and his previous novels became translated into English. In fact, England is distinctly late to the party, I would say. Georgi has won a number of other prizes for his work, including the Primo Strega Europeano, that was in 2021, and the Central European Angelus Award in 2019. He's also discussing two other of his works which have just recently been translated into English, one of which is The Physics of Sorrow, and the other is The Story Smuggler. His previous work includes essays, non-fiction, poetry, and commentary of political and literary nature. Discussing Georgi Gospodinov's work this evening, two of my colleagues here at the European Studies Centre, Paul Betts, Professor of Modern European History, and Marilena Anastasopoulou, who's a postdoctoral fellow at the ESRC and a research associate here at the European Studies Centre at St Antony's. I'm going to start off by asking you just to introduce The Physics of Sorrow, if you could, and then perhaps to read from that work.
Let me say first, good evening, good late afternoon. This is my favorite time of the day. And because usually photographs right now, they photograph only writers or panelists, I will ask you, could I make a picture of you? Okay, thank you. I really think that, yeah, people who... Thank you.
Can we do a second waving? Can you wave? Can we do a second? That was the serial. Can we do
a So I will start with The Physics of Sorrow. It's my second novel. And maybe after that we will discuss about Bulgarian sorrow.
That's right.
G. God was the first secret, the first of the forbidden things that you could only talk about at home. There is no God in Bulgaria, Grandma, I blurted out as soon as we got home and I caught sight of her pouring oil into the icon lamp on the wall. My grandmother crossed herself quickly and invisibly. She surely would have snapped at me for such talk, but she saw my father in the doorway and merely said, "Well, what is there in Bulgaria anyway? There is no paprika, no oil." Only she could combine the country's physical and metaphysical deficit like that: God, oil, and paprika. She would read the Bible furtively. She had wrapped it in a newspaper so it wouldn't show. She would read at random, dragging her arthritis index finger along the lines and moving her lips. Thus, I heard the whole apocalypse in whispers. In the late afternoons of my childhood, under the quiet Jericho trumpets of the flies buzzing around the room. My grandmother knew she shouldn't talk about such things in front of people, so as to protect my father, who could get into trouble. My father knew that he shouldn't talk about other things and locked himself up with the radio in the kitchen, so as not to screw up my life. That's what my mother said. I knew that I shouldn't talk about anything I'd heard at home, so the police wouldn't come and screw up my parents' lives. A long chain of secrets and lies that made us a normal family, like all the others. That was the greatest trick of the whole conspiracy, being like the others. An official history of the 1980s. That marked the beginning of the end. Soviet general secretaries started dying of every year or two like an epidemic. The ritual was already worked out. School was called off for a day. The next day we would watch the funeral in the school hallway, and the class presidents would cry. In fact, the whole period I was in puberty can be briefly described through the prism of the complex political context of the 80s. First kiss with a girl, Brezhnev dies. Second kiss, different girl, Andropov dies. Third kiss, Cherlenko dies. And killing them. First humbling sex in the park, Chernobyl. A long half-life of exponential decay ensures. Migration of sorrow. Empathy is unlocked in some people through pain. For me, it happens more often through sorrow. The physics of sorrow, initially the classical physics thereof, was the subject of my pursuits for several years. Sorrow, like gases and vapors, doesn't have its own shape or volume, but rather takes on the shape and volume of the container or space it occupies. Does it resemble the noble gases? Most likely not, as much as we may like the name. The noble gases are homogeneous and pure, monoatomic. Besides, they have no color or odor. No, sorrow is not helium, krypton, argon, xenon, radon. It has an odor and a color, some kind of chameleonic gas that can take on all the colors and scents in the world, while certain colors and scents easily activate it. The more important thing is that its gravitational field is negligibly small, to continue the analogy with gases. From this, it follows that invisible front cyclones and anti-cyclones of sorrow hover around us. Their migration, their movement from one place to another is a remarkable fact. The blindness that causes us to pass over this fact is astonishing. Sometimes I'm overtaken by a vague sense of sorrow, which doesn't seem to be mine. Sorrow from Northern Africa, let's say. Not local, strange, faded by the sun, yellow with grains of sand from the desert, like that yellow rain that fell last year, leaving opaque blotches on the window. I could sketch out a geographical map of the immigration of sorrows. Some places are said in one century, others in another. That was the part of the physics of sorrow. Actually, it's a book. When I worked on this book, there was an article in Economist with the title, "The Saddest Place in the World." The saddest place in the world was Bulgaria. It was according to this, classification, this about the happiness rating. And I really wanted to describe the Bulgarian sorrow. I started with this. Is there something particular in Bulgarian sorrow? So it's part of the Balkan sorrow. It's like everywhere. And so the result was this book. In Bulgaria, the title is, I like the word for sorrow in Bulgaria. It's not easy to translate this concept of sorrows.
And I had a question about that, if that's okay. So sometimes stories seem to move more easily than people do. And that's something you talk about in one of your books, The Story Smuggler. But what happens to emotions when they do move and when they are translated? I was wondering if any of your British readers would ever understand that.
Okay, that's why I will explain now the phonetics of the sorrow, the taga, Bulgarian word. The word is taga in Bulgarian, taga. It's not easy. Just try to whisper these words. Taga, taga. If you try, you will see how your Adam apple moves. Taga. It's like you should swallow something, which is connected with the Bulgarian sorrow. I think that this is connected with the culture of silence that we have. But the unarticulated sorrow is the deeper sorrow, actually. And taga, you have this vocal U, which is not easy to pronounce. You know, usually we say taga, taga, or taska in Russian. But the Bulgarian sorrow is a quite different sorrow. For me, it's connected with the unhappened things, the things that never happened, and the culture of silence. It's a mixture between patriarchal culture and this culture of fear during the communist times. We didn't like to talk, or we were afraid to talk about personal things in a public place. We could talk in the table, tete-a-tete, but we were always suspicious to talk outside in a way because you don't know here who is the spy in the family. And anyway, for me, it's important. This is important topic about sorrow and in the connection of the sorrow with the things that never happened. What I mean with the things that never happened. I mean that in Bulgaria, like in other communist countries, but not all of them, we were not allowed to travel abroad. And some people could say, okay, it's not a big trauma, you will say that, but no, it's a big trauma. I like very much what Georgi Markov, and I mentioned this name here in UK, not by chance. Georgi Markov is the Bulgarian writer who was killed in London on the bridge. Waterloo Bridge with the Bulgarian umbrella. It's called the case of Bulgarian umbrella with the poison capsule in 1977. Yeah. And unfortunately, he became, he was not so famous here with his short stories and with his novels, but only with the case of Bulgarian umbrella. But anyway, he wrote a lot of this non-traveling culture, let's say. And this is one of the things about Bulgaria that happened. Georgi Markov said something very interesting. He quoted Montaigne. Montaigne said that something like this. I never was interested in traveling to India, but if someone forbidden me to travel to India, I will be the happiest person in the world. So more than 80% of Bulgarians never ever traveled abroad during the communist time. It's a huge percent. And I mean, they were not allowed to travel in the West, for sure. But actually, they didn't travel even in the communist countries around. And this was a part of the Bulgarian unhappened things, which is connected with the sorrow. Is it easily translatable? Is the sorrow translatable, or Bulgarian sorrow? Yeah, I think so. I think so because sorrow is a personal thing. Of course, it's connected with the political things, the political issues, with what happened in your countries or not happened. But I realized when I had the readings, let's say in Switzerland, in Zurich, and here in London, when I talk about the character, a boy from late 70s in this book, who is sitting alone in the afternoons in his room waiting for his parents to come back and have these feelings of abandonment.
And he's called Georgi, this boy. He's
Yeah,
called Georgi,
yeah,
and he's born at around
yeah.
the same time.
Yeah, of course, it's part of my memories about
Yeah.
my childhood in the late 70s. But, you know, this feeling of abandonment for a kid who is sitting alone on the house basement, we used to live in this part of the house, which is on the windows were on the sidewalk level because it was cheaper. And this is something that I think everyone could feel this feeling when you wait for your parents, when you are alone in the home. And that's why, yeah, the sorrow is translatable, of course. Everything is translatable. In other case, I wouldn't write my books. They will not be translated in different languages. So I think, yes, it's translatable. And just to finish this with Bulgarian sorrow, I think that in comparison with the Saudade, let's say, this Portuguese sorrow, with Turkish sorrow, Hüzün, that Orhan wrote the books about Hüzün. These sorrows are sorrows of the big empires that lost everything, that they can talk out of the country that they own. The Bulgarian sorrow is the second level of sorrow. It's a different sorrow because we never own this. We never been this kind of empire. This is a sorrow, Bulgarian sorrow, a sorrow about the things that you never, about the places that you never visited, but you imagined them. I mean, my father and my mother, they never traveled abroad. When I was for the first time in Paris, I called to my father from Champs-Élysées, told him, okay, I'm here, but it's not such an impressive thing. And he told me, how could you talk like this? How could you speak like this? My parents invented, because they read books, we watch movies. They invented their own Paris and London and Berlin, and it was even more beautiful than the real ones. In a way. So this is also part of the beginning. So.
Thank you very much. I'd like to invite you to read from Time Shelter now, if that's okay.
Time Shelter. And then the past set out to flood the world. It spread from one person to another like an epidemic, like the Justinian plague or the Spanish flu. Do you remember the Spanish flu of 1918? Agustin would ask. Not personally, I would reply. It was terrible, Agustin would say. People simply dropped dead on the streets. You could get infected by everything. All it took was someone saying hello to you, and by the next evening you would be dead. Yes, the past is contagious. The contagion had crept in everywhere. But that wasn't the most frightening part. There were some quickly mutating strains that demolished all immunity. Europe, which had thought that after several serious lapses in reason in the 20th century, it had developed full resistance to certain obsessions, particular types of national madness and so on, was actually among the first to capitulate. One evening, two quiet electric Teslas would pull up in front of the clinic at Hedelstrasse, and three men in dark blue suits would get out to see Agustin. One of the men, the chairman in blue, had come there before, since his mother was a patient. Later, he stopped by a few more times on his own to hold long conversations with Agustin. His visits were discreet, incognito. He was one of the big three in the European Union. The past rising up everywhere, filling with blood and coming to life. A radical move was needed, something unexpected and prescient, which would stop his irresistible centrifugal force. The time for love had ended, now came the time for hate. If hate were the gross domestic product, then the growth of prosperity in some countries would soon be sky high. A certain delay, a way to inhibit the process and gain some time. That evening, the three men in blue had come searching for something at the source. When we talk about Alzheimer's, about amnesia and memory loss, we skip over something important. People suffering from this not only forget what was, but they are also completely incapable of making plans, even for the near future. In fact, the first thing that goes in memory loss is the very concept of the future. The task was as follows. How can we gain a little more time for tomorrow when we face a critical deficit of future? The simple answer was by going backwards a bit. If anything is certain, it's the past. 50 years ago is more certain than 50 years from now. If you go 2, 3, even 5 decades back, you come out exactly that much ahead. Yes, it might already have been lived out. It might be a second-hand future. but it's still a future. It's still better than the nothingness before us now. Since the Europe of the future is no longer possible, let's choose the Europe of the past. It's simple. When you have no future, you vote for the past. A referendum on the past.
Thank you. So the clinic that you refer to in that reading is a place where Gostin treats people who have memory loss, Alzheimer's and dementia. And one of the ways he does that is by having rooms, areas, apartments where they can live in a time that they can remember. And then, as you described there, the contagion is that that idea spreads out first to towns and to cities, but then to whole countries in Europe. And there are votes as people choose which time that they're going to live in order, as you say in that reading, to get a future where they currently don't see one. And one of the things that's incredibly funny about that when you describe it is that people in Sweden were choosing which of the best brilliant pasts they could choose from, whereas people in Bulgaria were choosing which of the most sorrowful pasts they were going to choose from. So there's a real sense of people finding shelter from time, within time in this book, and that playing out in different ways. And I don't want to talk anymore, but I don't want to spoil the ending if you haven't read it yet. But how does your history shape your exploration of what is in this book a European politics of memory?
I started this book in 2019. But the idea about the clinics of the past came to me 15 years ago. And actually, in the beginning, this idea was very innocent, was very bright. I talked with some neuroscientists, and this idea really worked. And neuroscientists, they use this kind of retrotherapy. So I imagined what would be if we have the whole room and people with Alzheimer's could live inside and could live in the floors of the 1960s, 1970s, or 1980s in the same time, which is inside of them. But then in 2019, something happened after 2016, I would say. And here, Brexit and the Trump election. And I decided to write this novel, but the idea wasn't so innocent anymore because the past and nostalgia was weaponized. And so I decided to write this book, starting with this, for me, good idea for the clinics of the past. But then, because the past really was, came like flood, and people and populists use it, I decided to have the second part of the novel with the European countries who couldn't live anymore in this future cancelled situation. And they decided to vote to make a referendum about the happiest decade of 20th century, where they could come back. And by the way, I realized that the word referendum, the etymology of the word referendum is very interesting. It's connected with the past, because we have in Latin referro, not to say carrying back, taking back, going back, moving back, referrum, which is very interesting because our referendums are always for the future. But this referendum, etymologically, politically, will be the referendum for the past. And actually, in a way, Trump election was also a kind of referendum for the past to be great again. And other referendums were referendums for the past. And I decided to imagine, to write about which is the happiest past decade that every European country will vote for, and what will change when we vote in the happiest decade. What will change? And for me, one of the interesting things is that we don't change. It's not exactly nostalgia, because nostalgia is connected with the nostos, with the home, with the space, with the longing for the space. It's an algus to the space, to the nostos. No, I think that time is now much more important than the space. because the space, we know the space is, what you say, it's easier to have the space, to move the space, to found the space, the time is much more, the territory of the time is quite bigger than the territory of the space, if you could say it in this way. And what we feel now, it's a kind of chronostalgia. It's a kind of algos for the different times, algos for the different chronos. And what populists and politics are using it now in the ideology of the past. I was born in 1968, so I was 21 when the system changed in Bulgaria in 1989. And I remember clearly how my Bildungsroman, my growing up was connected with the promising of the bright future. The communist ideology, they promise us future. But something changed and doesn't change, actually, because now they're promising us the past, the bright past. So it's again, it's the same empty check. It's the same, nothingness of the future or the past that they promised. And that's why I decided to focus on this topic and the second part, of this novel. I wrote about the dealers of the past, the people who make this like a business, not only politicians, but now we have dealers of the past. And because I think that as a person, I'm a nostalgic person, actually. As a writer, I like to write about the past because the past is much more interesting. It's full of sense, it's full of faces, with stories. But I don't want the populists to steal my past, my personal past, because they work with the collective past. It's a different. It's normal to go back to the rooms of your personal past. We're doing every day or many times on the day. But when you invent the collective past of society, it could be dangerous.
Thank you very much. We invite my colleague Paul to offer his reflections on the book.
Great, thank you very much, and thank you for providing the books. Also, congratulations on the Booker Prize. Great pleasure to read these. I recommend everyone to read these novels. Very, very stimulating. They're particularly interesting also for historians, especially Time Shelter. I'm going to speak about that for, I guess, 7-8 minutes or so. Historians, I guess, by training are in the kind of business of not peddling, at least not supposed to, in terms of time shelters, or at least images of nostalgia, mythic past. The idea of what we do typically is kind of challenge these particular myths. Though some, of course, end up doing that, as we're often familiar, but I think what you, in a sense, you're drawing attention to the kind of politics of building these time shelters. And I think actually it's a kind of zeitgeist book in terms of the broader trends, way outside the kind of world of professional history writing and memory making. I think it's actually a very, very important book in terms of your finger on the pulse of what's actually happening in terms of European identity politics. So I'd like to do is, in a sense, make 4 points, 2 about memory, then I'm going to talk 2 about Europe itself. I mean, in a sense, the book's about the kind of history as therapy, as a kind of form of therapy. And you just said what inspired you about the book, partly driven by this kind of populism, what you call a kind of weaponization of nostalgia. And that's true, but for historians, of course, there are many eras in history in which these things, these upheavals create this new kind of fond, romantic look back on what had happened. Of course, for the Romantics in the 1820s, and since after the French Revolution, a kind of wistful look about the world that was lost. You certainly had this at the end of the First World War, end of the Second World War. Anybody had grown up in the United States in terms of how Reagan, for example, peddled the 1950s as a kind of time shelter, kind of Eisenhower America. So this goes on, and politicians are very, very good at doing this. But I think you're right, there's a kind of mass production of this nostalgia or myth making, which I think is actually quite important. I'd like to, second point is talk about the forms of memory, which I found very interesting in the book. We're aware of the kind of trend or the discussion about safe spaces, in the sense what you're talking about, the idea of safe times. And I think that's actually quite important, this kind of escape into artifice, because the idea of the popularization of history, we're familiar with that. Essentially, we've seen a lot of work over the decades by, let's say, filmmakers, television producers, that in a sense, making kind of mythic past. What's interesting here is that the history makers in time shelters have moved to the world. They're interior decorators, they're designers, they're in a sense set designers. It's a kind of way in which they're working with kind of the world of frozen interiors, trying to reconstruct an interior from a particular decade of a country, which is quite important. So history, in a sense, is in a sense a world of style, of aesthetics, of decoration. The soothing past, interestingly here, it's not the world of being outside. It's not the world of public buildings. It's not public statuary. It's not the world of parades. It's not communal halls. It's a very private space that's experienced collectively, which I think is quite important. And if you go or you're aware of kind of Alzheimer's clinics around the world, they typically help their patients through other media, through music, through books, through photographs, through dance. And those don't play any role here in terms of the history as therapy is much more about a reconstruction of the kind of style of a period. So we talk about comfort food. This is in a sense a story of comfort spaces and comfort memories. What I find particularly interesting is that it's a world in which the interiors, or at least the material objects, become the world of authenticity. They, in a sense, invoke the memories of these people to make them feel they're living, let's say, in that desired decade. So these things, let's say, were produced not just in 70s Bulgaria, but anywhere where I grew up in the United States. They were never produced or manufactured to be collected and preciously remembered. It was the world of the kind of detritus of industrial society. But in this world, that the detritus of industrial society, the everyday objects that were meant to be disposable, not precious objects, end up in a museum. They end up in these private spaces as, in a sense, the vehicles of memory and identity. I think that's a very kind of interesting shift. And if we think of the etymological origins of furniture, Möbel in German, Mobilier in French, it's about movement, right? And what's quite interesting is that at least in this world, these are frozen interiors in which these objects take on the world of permanence, it's these objects that were designed as ephemeral have become very, very permanent markers of identity. And I thought that was kind of an interesting shift. Now, the question I guess I have for you is that you say that, but then you allude to the fact there's a danger in that world. You talk about how when the ephemeral becomes permanent, there's a kind of sense which you call the past as poison. There's a passage you have on 116 says, does the past disintegrate or does it remain practically unchanged like plastic bags, slowly and deeply poisoning everything around it? So this world of reconstructing these frozen interiors, it seems to also imply its own demise, at least potentially. I thought that was quite interesting. The next comments I want to talk about this kind of flight into nostalgia or the mythic past. 2 points on Europe. One is that you chronicle across Europe the kind of political parties are promoting different decades of national histories. And even the EU in the book sets a kind of referendum allowing each country to pick its favorite decade. So the Danes and the Portuguese pick the 1970s, the French and the Spanish pick the 1980s, and then the Czechs and most of the Eastern Europeans, though in a sense you say the Bulgarians and Romanians, given their 1989, are excluded from the kind of romantic view of 1989, but they, for the most part, pick the 1990s as their desired decade. But I was wondering why, in a sense, you see national pasts as so authentic. It could be regional pasts, it could be European pasts, it could be international pasts, but it's very much, these interiors are about stories of national identity. I thought that was kind of an interesting assumption of this could be an effort to capture a moment, a kind of pre-IKEA standardization of everyday interiors, a moment in which there were still distinctive national styles in terms of interiors. Now we live in a world in which you go on Airbnb, and whether it's you're looking at flats in Copenhagen or Rome, they look quite similar with some various national inflections. But in a sense, the national distinctions are actually quite important in helping the people in those countries overcome their sense of alienation and disenchantment. I thought that was the kind of assumption that the national history will actually help them was a kind of reclamation story, which I thought actually quite interesting. The next point is, I think, something you say toward the very end of the book. You say, I think very suggestively, it's been written that the past is a foreign country. Nonsense, the past is my home country. The future is a foreign country full of strange faces. I won't set foot there. So in that way, it's a book that the future, as you said early on at the beginning, the future offers no shelter. But my feeling what the book's really about is that the present doesn't offer any shelter. The future has been foreclosed as an option. The past becomes the place of desire. But this is only happening because the present itself has been unsheltered. You know, something has happened there. And again, that's not the first time. You think of, let's say, that people wrote about life after the French Revolution or after the First World War, and especially after the Second World War. This idea of a kind of homeless humanity was a very common phrase in Central Europe in 1945. This idea of a kind of unhoused humanity now has been kind of ripped apart from, in terms of a disordered world, that the refugee has become a kind of signature of the age. So a lot of discussion of that in 1946, 1945, 1947 across Europe, but you're in a sense suggesting this is now 30 years after the upheavals of 1989, that Europe seems to live in a very unsheltered present, but it's not necessarily driven by an immediate crisis, just a kind of set of upheavals. And I guess the question I have for you is that you're suggesting Europeans have become kind of time refugees, seeking a past, but it's unclear what's driving that particular crisis. It's a kind of 30-year after effect of 89, set of issues, but what's in a sense driving people to seek solace and comfort and protection in a kind of deep mythic past? I find that was quite interesting. So to me, the book is really partly about the farewell to the present. And you think of the German discussions about the coming to terms with the past that become kind of an industry in terms of understanding German history after 1945. But this seems to be a book about the difficulties of coming to terms with the present, kind of Gegenwartsbewältigung in German. And the book's partly about, it seems to be a kind of fin de siècle malaise, but it's the beginning of the century and not the end of one. It's the beginning of the 21st century, but it has a kind of fin de siècle despair with it. So there's a kind of funny mixing of the beginning and end of centuries, a kind of diagnosis of the present. So my question is, where do you think this is going? Do you think that this world of these time shelters is a temporary blip, or do you think this is a trend in which this will just continue? So those are just a couple of reflections.
Thank you. I think it's such a serious question. I don't know. Yeah. I'm not sure I can answer all of them, but you know, because we started with the historians and historians. Actually, when I make my research for the book, before I started to write, I spent 1 year in New York Public Library, and one of the happiest discovery was to read all issues of New York Times from the autumn of 1939. Because in my novel, there is this very important day, the 1st of September 1939. I think this is like a black hole that we still are circling around it. And what was interesting, when you see the issue of New York Times, the 1st of September 1939, you will see on the first 3 pages, they changed the news in the last minute because Germany invaded Poland. And on the first page, you have with the big letters, Germany invaded Poland, and all the schedule of the fighting the troops. On the 3rd page, they have this famous picture. They always have a big picture, big photo on the 3rd page. And they have the German school with all German kids and their teachers with gas masks. Have they prepared? It's a really, really astonishing picture. And after that, they didn't manage to change the whole issue, of course. After that, you will see the news and the advertisement from the world of yesterday. In the one and the same issue, we have the world of today and tomorrow, the world of tomorrow, and the world from yesterday. You will have all these new opened bar, Cinzano bar in Lower Manhattan. or the advertisement about the prices and some dress and something like this. And what I thought, and I tried to put in this novel, is how and when the everyday life became history, and how we live like now on 24, after 24 of February, how we live on this edge where yesterday we have our everyday life and tomorrow it's history, it's a war, it's something else. It was very, very important for me for writing the novel. About the question why national past, yeah, why not European past or Eastern European past of this like so the Gaussian who invented it. So that first we should manage with our national past, and also the very important thing is that the populists, the politicians, they deal with national past. Nostalgia is important for the nationalism, right? The nationalism is like как се казваха тези, които пият кръв?
Bloodsuckers.
Who suck blood from the past, from the nostalgia. And this is a question of nationalism. So that's why for me, for Gauss, it was important to react to this, to show how this chosen national path could be kitschy and dangerous in the same way. And that's why I wanted to put this national path. Yeah, about the present moment. Of course, the novel is not based in the past. It's not a novel. It's not a time machine novel. It's not a novel when someone is traveling to the past. It's a novel about this how we decided to bring past here in the present, because we have this big hole in the meaning living now today, and so this is more or less connected with the present, with the feeling that you don't feel future is a shelter, of course, past is the fake shelter. And yeah, what to do now in this moment when we have the feeling, which is very close to the feeling of apocalypse. We have the feeling that all the times coexisted here. If you walk on the street in Bulgaria, let's say, but everywhere in the country, I don't know, you could see this kind of reenactment that were very popular. They became more and more popular now. Even now, in Bulgaria, we have reenactment, very famous reenactment of our most famous unsuccessful revolt. Only unsuccessful revolts are famous. And we have so detailed reenactment, really detailed reenactment that one day I think that this revolt will be successful. Yeah. And Ted, you're absolutely right when you describe this interior design of the past in the novel. Yes, this is the kind of irony that we try to, it's very important, the way we try to bring the past here is very important. You could reconstruct the past, you could reenact the past, make a reenactment of the past, but this is not you couldn't reach the past in this way. It's more or less three-dimension printing of the past. It's a plastic past in a way. It could be useful for the politician, but it's not the real feeling of the past. You couldn't reach the smell, the music, and this everyday thing of the past. I wanted Ghostin and the main character. They wanted to reconstruct the past through the smells, through the melodies, through the everyday small objects, and things like this. And this is two different conceptions of the past.
if it's okay, I'm going to invite you now to read from, it's not your third book, but it is the book that has just been translated into English. The Story Smuggler.
So, yeah, this book is started with my childhood. My earliest apprehension of literature came when I was little in an ordinary, not to say run-down neighborhood eatery. Here, every morning, my father would order dried soup for us and lemonade. The tables were square, their plastic covers riddled with cigarette burns. The counter was greasy. The windows were sweaty from the hot soup which customers were blowing on and slurping. Having first seasoned it with abundant vinegar and garlic. Hanging on the wall was a blue plexiglass signboard on which I read for the first time. Writers are surgeons of the human soul. Their job is to cut from the soul all that is rotten and decayed. I would read this slogan while sipping my dried soup. One spoonful, surgeons, a second spoonful, rotten, a third, decayed. What a peculiar taste that soup came to have. I don't know whose ideological brainchild it was to hang this slogan in an eatery where no living writer had ever been spotted sipping soup. Writers inhabited other worlds and other restaurants, while here the only customers were workers on early shift. With the intensity of a child, age 7 or 8, I was already imagining the writers with their white coats, surgical gloves, face masks, and enormous soul scalpels. I had no clear notion what the soul might consist of, where exactly it was located among the internal organs, or whether or not it bled. Yet it was evidently something that rots and decays, something that required constant excision. Instantly, I felt a loathing for writers while I felt compassion and protectiveness toward the soul, wherever it was located. Never have I forgotten that plexiglass sign in our local eatery, and if I'm asked to list influences of my work after Borges, the Bible, and my grandmother, I like to point to it, for it saved me from the presumption that I could ever get away with the human soul. Long ago, then, I killed off the literary surgeon with it. Ever since childhood, I have been aware, thanks to my grandmother and the stories she wouldn't tell me until I fell asleep. I was afraid to fall asleep. That stories, which is to say literature, serve principally to provide solace. And what is more, that the ill-defined creature called the soul ought to be imagined as a pet rabbit with soft ears and warm paws, a creature requiring no knife, but rather asking for comfort and caresses. When I was 6 years old, I had a terrifying dream that recurred 3 nights in a row with mechanical repetitiveness. At that time, I was living with my grandmother in the countryside, and she was the only person with whom I could share the dream. I remember clearly how she stopped me at the very first word, saying that scary dreams ought not to be recounted because in that way they come alive, or as she put it, they fill up with blood. The next night I had the dream again. I couldn't recount it, but nor could I keep it to myself. It was then that I was saved by an idea that occurred to me, that the only solution was to write it down. In this way, I would not have to talk about it, and yet I'd be free of it. I had learned to write the previous year thanks to my grandfather, Boulder, and the chemical pencil. Bulgarian chemical pencils have to be licked and then they write in bright, glossy letters. So, with that chemical pencil, I wrote the dream down in the empty final pages of a book. For this is how we wrote in the empty pages and margins of book, like medieval copyists who would dare to leave a private note, usually a complaint while they were at work. Bad toothache, almost unendurable, or some note of this sort. Yeah, I think I will stop here. We have time for questions.
Thank you very much, Marilena.
Thank you.
Just to finish this, that this first nightmare that I had, and I wrote down on the list, I never ever had it again, but I never ever also forgot it. I still remember this 49 minutes later, so that's the price. If you can, yeah, you can overcome it, but you will, but it became part of your memory.
And your grandmother was half right.
Thank you very much, Georgi, for this excellent presentation. I cannot commend the quality of your work enough. So my brief intervention today is structured around 2 points. The first one is the key themes of Georgi Gospodinov's work, and the second part is comments about the construction of stories. So navigating between past and present, irony and melancholy, Georgi Gospodinov has produced extremely thoughtful and fascinating novels of the happened and the unhappened, the experienced and the imagined. His books address questions of history, memory, identity, sorrow, silence, and temporality. Your time sector illustrates how nostalgia of the past forms the politics of the present, and how memory and identity inform but also construct each other. Memories and dreams of others are accessed by the narrator's empathetic ability in the physics of sorrow, while personal stories and fantasies of the author's childhood in communist Bulgaria lie at the heart of the story smuggler, bringing his historically formed subjectivity to the forefront. I would locate the construction of stories in relation to your work at the confluence of the following 4 points. So my first comment is about memory. You discuss individual and family memory, collective memory, and cultural memory that concerns the society as a whole. The time sector is a fantastic illustration of these different levels and layers of remembering, but also forgetting. Can you tell us more about the interplay of these levels? Or where is memory located? Is it transferred? In this book, you also mention, and I quote, that your parents' memories become your own, while in other parts of the book, you acknowledge limitations of this transfer through excerpts such as, he never said a word about what happened to him in the camp, never. And this brings me to my second point about memory of trauma and silence. Given that trauma is both the event, but also the memory of the event, what is the role of trauma in your story? According to the 3 stages of trauma as developed by Freud, first there is the phase of the initial shock, then we can have the latency period, and then there is an onset of recurring traumatic memories. So to this inescapable reality, you are actually referring through an Auschwitz survivor who, and I quote, had clearly tried to forget and not talk about it, about this experience. And of course, I was thinking that indeed stories are about remembering, but they're also about forgetting and silence. So what do these silence reveal about the construction of history? And in the physics of sorrow, you're also narrating memories isolated in the private sphere, memories that are become to an extent refugees. You mentioned the forbidden things that you could only talk about at home. So how are you dealing with silence in the private, but also in public spheres while writing? My last consideration is about the role of individual and collective past as sources of formulation of the present. Dynamic oscillations between continuities and discontinuities of the past and the present pervade your writing. And in the time shelter, the past acquire various characterizations. The past is a local thing. The past is contagious. The past is both lived and imagined. The past is only in the singular. And the borders between the past and the future are very blurry. So I will reverse one of the book's questions, and I think that Paul also mentioned that, wondering, does the past or nostalgia about the past disintegrate, or does it remain unchanged like plastic bags? And is the past singular or plural? And please allow me to finish with a very quick personal realization, but I'm partly from Thessaloniki, and my grandmother used to advise me that scary dreams should not be recounted, otherwise they'll become alive. So I was amazed to read the same phrase in your book, The Story Smuggler. And I was wondering if you have any reflections about a potentially shared, yet perhaps fragmented sense of Balkan identity. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Yeah. Before writing Physics of Sorrow and Time Shelter, both books have this line of memory and identity, and also time capsules are very important in the Physics of Sorrow. Clinics for the Past are important in Time Shelter. Before that, I had 2 or 3 projects connected with the Bulgarian, with the personal stories, everyday memory, and socialist or communist times in Bulgaria. With my friends, we started to collect personal stories in 2004. So 2004 is 15 years after 1989. And what was my discovery that people were not ready to talk personal stories about their past in communist times. It was really strange for me. Before that, we had books about the communist past, mostly written by historians or by politologists, who describe the big picture. But for me, I missed the everyday story from this. I missed the traumas. I missed the personal memory about this time. And we made with my friends a small project. We opened an internet site. We traveled to the small villages to ask people. And I remember I asked one old woman, yeah, tell me, what do you remember personally from your life in this period? And she just watched me and says, I don't have memories. I don't have memories. It couldn't be. You have the whole life. And then we started to talk without microphones, without everything. And she told me about, she had a brother who was in the camps. She had some different stories connected with the communist part, with the communist power and so on. But you know, she was learned that the personal stories, like the bad dreams, like nightmares, it's not good to be there, to be told loud, because you don't know what will happen if you talk about your very personal things. If you talk about your brother who was in the camp, in the communist camp, it could be dangerous. You know. And also, we will learn. The ideologists don't like, of course, personal stories. We should have, because personal stories don't fit good in the big picture. And so we will learn that our personal stories, or the personal stories of my parents or my grandparents, they don't matter. They say, okay, we are so ordinary people. What kind of personal story you could expect from me? Nothing. I just got married. I had kids. I'm an old man. Nothing interesting was happened to me. And that's why I decided to make this book. We collected personal stories. They were very interesting personal stories. And the second thing that I found was that you understand something when starting to tell about this. The people who tell their stories, they didn't know that their stories hide a kind of trauma. They started to tell these stories like a funny story. You know, we were young and they forbidden us to have some haircut or to to wear some kind of dress. And when they narrated their stories, in the course of the narrating, which is important, they understood that, okay, there's something wrong. It wasn't so fun. So that's why in my books, they're full of personal stories. They're full of small traumas, because people they don't believe that small traumas matters in a way. And this was important for the personal memories. For the silence, yeah, I explained why. The silence was a mixture between fear and patriarchal, things that it's not good to tell personal stories.
Balkan identity.
Balkan identity. Yeah. It's very interesting because we are neighbors with Yugoslavia, Serbia now. We had quite different kind of everyday experience with the people from Yugoslavia, from Serbia. For us, Yugoslavia was the most Western Eastern country that we could get, because people there were allowed to travel. That's why I say that it's a real big trauma when you are not allowed to travel. It's a real and people in Bulgaria didn't realize before. In a way, they realized, I think, later. Now we are allowed to travel. We forgot this thing. But anyway, so we couldn't talk, I think, about the common Balkan communism or everyday life. Of course, there are similar things, but for me, these differences are very interesting. I talked with a Romanian author, and for them, we are like Yugoslavia. We were there west because TV. Yeah, because there were their TV in the communist times stopped at I don't know, at 8 or 9 o'clock, and then they were allowed to catch Bulgarian TV. And in Bulgarian TV, the things that they remembered were things from my childhood. So it was a smuggling of childhood memories between us, the Romanian Mircea Cărțărescu, other Romanian writers from my generation. When I ask, what do you remember from your childhood? And they start to singing me, it's a Bulgarian child song. Every day we had this small 10 minutes TV show for kids at 8, around 8 o'clock. 10 minutes, yeah, and then you should go. Yeah. So it was important memory for Romanian kids. And it's very interesting. I don't know, maybe someone wrote about this Balkan communist experience. So if no one wrote about this, we should start to do this. It's very important. Yeah, this is a difference between our kind of community.
Thank you very much. I'm going to take questions from the audience. Before we do, I have one final question for you, if that's okay. And it's a question about Brexit. In Time Shelter, you say the problem with the UK is that Daniel Defoe beat John Donne. I just invite you to talk to our audience about that.
Yeah, it will be funny if I explain the Brexit in front of you. And it's a conversation in the novel between Gaustin and the main character, the narrator. And Gaustin said that, the difference is that Daniel Defoe on Clouseau, believing that you can survive alone and die. You don't need the other world. If you just believe in the Bible and you will follow and work on your earth, you will survive. John Donne, is famous saying, we are not an island. I can feel I find. It's really beautiful written. I quote it here in the 17th or 18th century. Anyway, I will not find now. But you know the saying that we are not an
No man is
island.
lion.
Yeah, and also this beautiful saying that the death of everyone diminishing myself. It's beautiful. And yes, I think that or Ghostin, okay, it's Ghostin, not me. He says that he's choosing Daniel before Robinson Crusoe.
We made the wrong choice.
Maybe John Donne is the right one.
Perfect, thank you very much. We have around half an hour for questions. And please, could we have the questions as short as possible so that we can have as many answers as possible? Gentlemen, you were the fastest.
Well, it's great to have you here, Georgi. It's such a pleasure. And I'm reminded of a conversation we had last time. We want to push it on you because I think it's relevant. So you come from a small peripheral country in Europe, but your stories have a universal ring to it. And we listen to Brexit and all those kind of canonical authors. But I mean, very often you see the pressure that you come from this place, you have to talk about your own experience and you're not entitled to comment on the big picture. I mean, how do you navigate that in your encounters with the outside world and be able to have authenticity, but also legitimately speak about issues that are common across many cultures?
Thank
Yeah.
you. I'm going to
Sure.
put 3 sets of questions and then you can pick your answer.
But I will forgot it's an all about Alzheimer's. Sometimes is that I really believe that the personal things are universal. Only the personal things are universal. So I'm telling my personal stories. I'm a very shy person actually, but it's now when I could write my personal story. I don't feel shy when I write my personal stories. And I think that this makes a connection between people from different countries. Yeah, we get the same, we feel the same way, sorrow, the feeling that something important doesn't happen. I had once a very nice reading in a small city in Italy, Sora, in Ciociaria. And they asked me, they told me, your book is written for our city, because I'm coming from small city Yambol in Bulgaria. And they thought, if you're living in a city that is on 300 kilometers from the center of the capital, you have the similar feelings. It doesn't matter if it's in Italy or Bulgaria, you have the same feeling that life happens somewhere else, that you are a bit far away from the world, from the center of the world. And it's a very personal feeling. Yeah.
Thank you. I'm sorry, could you just say your name for me?
David Budget, the European Studies Center.
Thank you. Next, Osman.
Marilena Anastasopoulou from the European Studies Center. Georgi, it's a privilege and such a a wonderful feeling to have you here in the room. And
Thank you for the invitation.
Oh, it's fantastic. Now, I wanted to ask about nostalgia because nostalgia, and you connected with sorrow in the Bulgarian sense, but then I think maybe this is universal in the sense that nostalgia is always a very, very sad thing, right? Yeah. It's like comfort food that, you feel well for a few minutes and then you are fat. Or even, for instance, when we're talking about the instrumentalization of nostalgia, Boris Johnson that you mentioned, he used the past, and then once he was prime minister, he didn't know what to do with it. I wanted to ask you, in your kind of understanding of nostalgia, is there any kind of positive sentiment in that? Is there any way that we can see it?
Yeah, thank you. You know that nostalgia appeared as a phrase, as a word, as a name, and as a concept in 17th century. It was invented from a Swiss doctor as an illness. Actually, it was, in the beginning, it was illness. It was described like illness, which this doctor observed in Swiss guards when they were abroad. And they felt something like, how is it called this?
Homesickness.
Yeah, like Serbian, heart beating. They became pale when they heard the bells of the cows. When they are abroad and they heard the bells of the cows, they had these feelings. And this doctor called this nostalgia. And he invented, so it started as a disease, in a way, it's a kind of disease, neurosis or something like this. But of course, as I said in the beginning, I believe that nostalgia is a very, very personal human thing. It's part of the empathy and everything that is important and positive in a way. And I don't believe that somewhere exist people who never feel nostalgia. And that's why I wanted to write about that nostalgia could have also dark side. When we talk about inventing a collective nostalgia. When you don't think deeper, what does it mean to have nostalgia for the 1970s? Because where is the mistake? When I say, oh, I want to live in the 1979, someone could use this to say, yes, because the communism was a good thing, because in 1979 you were happy, right? Yes, I was happy. You were happy because we had more free time, it was quiet, we were safety, we could visit the sea, visit the Black Sea. But if I nostalgic for 1971 or 9, it's because I was 12. I was 12 years old. And this mixture between personal nostalgia and political nostalgia, it's something very different. But yeah, when you think deeper, you could find this. But people usually, they just look, it's like, right, okay, yeah, I like to be in 1979 because the life was better there. But the problem, where is the problem? The problem is that actually personal time is irreversible, but the historical time is reversible in a way. I mean, politically, let's say you could be democracy, you could be a country with liberal democracy, and you could turn back to the totalitarian or authoritarian state. So political is reversible, political past is reversible, and there's the dangers, of course. So don't believe if someone will promise you that you will be 12 again. If we can back to 1979.
My next question is going to be from a woman, but you will be next. So yes, go ahead. Yes, please. No, sorry, the woman in front of you.
It would help for us to hear if people could stood up when they were speaking. It's been very difficult at the back of the room to hear the speakers.
Sorry about that. We will stand up now. Sorry, could you stand up, introduce yourself, and ask your question?
Me?
Yes, please.
This time. I spent half my life in Bulgaria, half of my life in Britain, so I don't know what kind of geek I am, but I have experience, the communist time. And talking about the Balkan identity, probably you would have an idea what unites us on Balkan identity, which predates communist times, like, for example, the ruin of the Ottoman Empire. Because Scottish writer Mercia Bagdermot
and probably you all know about her, wrote at least 10 books about Bulgaria, and she wrote about their national heroes, which reflects that kind of times. Nowadays, probably you know the Bulgarian poetess who lives in Scotland, so times are changing, and her name is Kapka, and she has been nominated on many occasions here in Britain about her poetry, not the Booker Prize, but also very prestigious award. But talking about the Balkan identity, no matter what unites us, we have different experience, almost as Georgi explained it. Yugoslavia was for Bulgarians the West, Romanians felt Bulgaria is the West. But then, what differs is, for example, even nowadays we have an argument whether we will celebrate 3rd of March as a national bank holiday, because this is when we were liberated from the so-called, and everybody contributes this to the Russian power, which is not the entire truth, actually. But why don't, if we all live on the Balkans and we all have been under Ottoman Empire, why Greece doesn't celebrate and doesn't have National Day of this celebration on whichever March or April or whenever they were, I'm sorry for my ignorance, whenever, they were liberated, or not Yugoslavia. And I think the difference is Greece has never been a communist country, while Bulgaria has been a communist country, and that differs. The attitude of people differs, because it all reflects all these, anti-type of regimes. In the same fashion, why doesn't Yugoslavia, which is similar to us, like an ex-communist country, why don't they celebrate 3rd of March? Although they also have been under the Ottoman Empire. Because, as he said, Yugoslavia, during the so-called communist parties, was a very pro-Western European country. It wanted to be, in a way, dictatorship, but the guy at the time, what was his name? I forgot, wanted to be neither dependent on Russia nor dependent on the West, but Yugoslavia. So what I mean is communism did vary on the Balkans, and unfortunately, because we were very, very pro-Russian, politics at the time, very closely related and dependence on Russia. I think we were the underdog, of this communist regime, which was the prototype of, nowadays everybody is, against Putin, except Bulgaria, because we still have not cleared the red carpet, unlike Romania. So what I mean is, historically, we do have some identity, but we also differ.
Thank you. You've also written about the invasion of Ukraine. So if you could take those comments and then any other reflections you had as well.
The answer to your remarks and your question will be very, very long, because really, if you came back, we should talk about the Ottoman Empire's legacy and what happened with this legacy after that. But about Russia, actually Bulgaria in 1962, Bulgaria, Todor Živkov, the General Secretary of Bulgaria, maybe not so many people know this, suggested Bulgaria to become 16th Republic of Soviet Union. It was really shameful, suggestion. So we were really the most obedient country to Russia. And now also the propaganda, Russian propaganda is very strong in Bulgaria, the strongest propaganda in the countries of the European Union. And, but it doesn't mean I don't believe that Bulgaria will turn back from pro-European politics and something like this. But this is another topic.
Yeah, because it's amazing. Marta Maginov, who spent 25 years living in Bulgaria. You know, she wrote at least 7 or 8 books on history of Bulgaria, not about only national heroes, but literally a history. I'm sorry, I get very excited about history because my nephew is a historian, but he's Harvardian historian, so he sees things a little bit different from the political populist.
Yeah, the books are quite famous even now. Books about Lesky, about the national history. She's famous in Bulgaria.
Yeah.
Thank you. Gentleman at the front.
I'll stand, Georgi. Good to see you here. One pun and one question. So the pun is, if you can tell the audience about the gondola in Venice. And I was wondering if we have a time shelter punt somewhere on the river. How many stories and histories we can reenact. Maybe each college can have a little room and choose a 14th century, 15th century or something like that. But the question is, I had trouble reading Time Shelter in one particular aspect because you're describing a past that is desired in a way. Those people are put in places where they feel comfortable, like comfort spaces. There are other paths that people make extraordinary effort to hide. I've been working on accountability and transitional justice for the last 20 years, and there are lots of elements of the past that people want to hide. And then there are lots of other people who try to actually pull this out and make it public and take cases and so on. So my question to you, where would you put a former Argentinian junta general? Former Argentinian general from the junta in that place in Switzerland?
Yeah, the book is only for Europe. So.
Well, Europe has its shadows.
Yeah. Actually, it was the hardest part of my book when I wrote, I must admit now, because it took a lot of research about every country. And I will say something. I had to envisage which country for which decade will fall. And I realized that, of course, economy is important, from which you were there. Politics is important. All of these big things are important. But maybe even more important than them were this invisible everyday feelings, also popular culture, also IKEA was important, Abba was important. And when you try to envisage, and even now, this exit poll of the results of the voting, what will be the result of the voting, you should take care about all these usually underestimated things, like the songs of the 60s, or the song of the 70s, or the movies, as we mentioned, that the movies are important with this mythology of the decades. That's why, in my case, Italy chose 1968, Dolce Vita, and all these big movies of the late 60s. This was important about the chosen. I don't know, maybe in the next book. I never been in Argentina. This is my favorite country.
Well,
I've never been.
An idea about
They won the World Cup in 1978.
Okay.
So there you go.
Okay. Yeah.
So there's lots of space for other places like this around the world and maybe for other parts of Europe. But
Maybe, yeah.
so a sequel time shelter 2, time shelter 3, and then the movie.
Actually, yeah. Now they staged, this week, they staged play Poland in Krakow, based on time shelter. But they asked me, could they invent time shelter in the Poland case, in the Poland 60s, in the Poland history. So yeah, maybe they will make a different. We spread out the shelters in the world.
Perfect. This gentleman here has had his hand up for a while.
And I'm here on the day when the Berlin Wall came down. I was in Sofia, which was regarded as a rather unusual thing to be doing. But I was there from the socialist group in the European Parliament. I was sent to explore and make contact with those who had been non-communist activists on the left. And I was making contact with people who had been in the Bulgarian Social Democratic Party in the late 1940s. And we helped the revival of the party, which was a very rewarding experience. But why I shall be very interested to read your book is one of the other things in my conversations that I had during my visits to Sofia in the next year or two, with people saying, we've had 40 years of our lives have been stolen. And to what extent, I should be interested in reading your book to know to what extent this feeling, it's not nostalgia, but in the sense, there's outer there, there's anger and bitterness at the loss of that 40 years. Has that continued to be a background feeling, a feeling of the 40 years that have been stolen from our lives? These were people I was meeting, they've been older than me, and they would have been 60, 70 years old then, but they felt they wanted to use the last years of their active lives back in a free democracy. Has this remained a feeling story you're telling? I'm looking forward to reading your book, but more generally, is this part of your feeling? The stolen years of Bulgarian history.
The stolen part of life during the communist time?
Yes.
Okay, yeah.
Before 89.
Of course, yeah, part of them realize this, but they are also part of the people who think that the transition period also stolen their life. So that's why we have this kind of nostalgia to this past.
30 years transition only. Still transition. We're still
That's the problem. Yeah, that's the
transition. So I don't know where we are going.
Well, you're on the front,
Yes, but we're still in Europe.
Eligatova Politics and International Relations Department. What struck me after reading the book, and now that we are having a conversation, that this is a book about Europe and the desire to go back to the past might something to do with the fact that Europe is perceived as continent in decline. Would you mention that perhaps other continents have ideas about the bright future? So in essence, my question is it because we are disappointed with the past and we lack the imagination for the future? That's why we are so easily drawn to the past, or why populists are so easily exploiting and weaponizing the idea about this great and glorious past that now seems to be fleeting away on the hill down rather than up. And that maybe there is this fascination.
I don't know. I think really that this feeling of deficit of the future is very important. In the past, we had much more future. 20 or 30 years ago, 40 years ago, I remember how I imagined the past, or how my generation imagined the past. Okay, how we imagine the future. In the future, we will cure all these diseases like cancer, AIDS, and so on and so on. We will be on the moon, we will walk on the moon or on the other planets. And more and more like this. We didn't imagine the war. I was sure. But what happens now? It's like in 1941 or 1939. No? Okay, we have war. This war I described in my novel. Actually, Time Shelter ended with a scene that in the beginning, I wanted to remove it from the manuscript because I gave the book to some friends to read it, and they thought, okay, this last scene is a bit too much. We could remove it. The last scene is about the new war that happened in Europe, that will happen in Europe, and it will be like full reenactment of the Second World War. And one shot will trigger the Third World War, 100 years after the Second World War, like a big reenactment. But anyway, the scene, I read the scene here, it's in the novel, and on 24th February, the same friend that told me about to remove it called me and said, look, what happened? And it happened in the same hour, you know that the Second World War started at 40-47 for the hour. The Putin invasion started at 40-50 in the morning. And it starts with tanks. And yeah, it's really what to say, unbelievable that it happened now. So I think that now we face this deficit of future strong, very strong, and what happened to us looks like we're coming back in the 20th century again. That we have the same level of anxiety, which was described by W.H. Auden, in this famous poem, September 1st, 1939. It starts like this. I sit in one of the dice at 52nd Street, uncertain at the place. This uncertainty, this anxiety, the level of anxiety, I think it's similar. And this is a time shift. It's turn us back.
Thank you. Thank you for waiting.
Yeah, perhaps it's David Priestland, History Faculty. Yeah, and perhaps you've already just answered my question. I mean, one thing I very much admired about your book was the literariness, you just mentioned W.H. Auden, references to Borges, but also, of course, to Thomas Mann's Magic Mountain, and in a way where you have another Swiss hospital that's trying to both cure a disease, but also a metaphorical disease of politics and culture, and failing to do so. But of course, the way the disease as man perceives it, but also the cures are very different to the cures you're describing. And so I just wondered whether you could reflect on those similarities and contrasts. I mean, you've obviously just talked about similarities in the Auden example, but I just wonder whether you could reflect on those. And are there particular diseases or cures, which the ways in which man was thinking about these things, and which are very different to the way you're thinking about.
Yes. Thank you very much for this question. Yes, actually, we think that we're working too long when we write our books. Actually, we end this conversation with different books, with different authors. And Thomas Mann, The Magic Mountain, was the book that was on my table when I wrote this book, and I tried to have a kind of conversation because one of the best reviews, I think it was here in UK. No, it was in Germany. No, sorry. They talk about this connection with Thomas Mann, and there was very good observation that the Thomas Mann disease was connected then with the what do you call with the lung. So disease in Time Shelter is connected with the man. It's a new pandemic, and actually, in medical terms, it's a really we will face this pandemic of the dementia and losing memory because we are growing old as a society, we're living more and more in the price. That after 80 years, maybe more than 60% of the people will have dementia. And in medical terms, it will be the new pandemic, the new illness, the lung illness. In metaphorical terms, which is also important for me, we are living in a gap between escaping living memory about Second World War. The people who remember or who took part in the Second World War, they disappeared now, they passed away. And we will have, or we have this gap of the memory. Actually, I think that one of the problems was that we took memory for granted. That, okay, once we wrote our books, we had our philosophy about Auschwitz, about Second World War, and we thought that we did our job, and we had this memory. But the problem is that memory is like a muscle. You should exercise it every day. You should tell stories. I like Paul Ricoeur, who said, we should tell endlessly our story. Telling the stories is a part of memory process. The silence, because you mentioned silence, the silence is, when you don't tell your stories, you forgot everything. The silence is part of the forgetting. Yeah, that's why in the end of our meeting, I want to say how important it is really to continue to tell our personal stories. We know from Shekrizad, I don't know how, is it Arabian Nights here? Yeah, you know that where she told every night one story, she gave one more day. And this is important lesson. I wrote in this book, my memory when I was child, and I used to read only books written in first person, because I knew that the main character will never die. Yeah, I can say like that. So this is telling a personal stories for memory, for postponing the end.
Thank you. We have time for 2 more questions, one of which will be from a woman. Yes, you're going to be asked.
So you talk a lot about personal identity and personal stories, but you said also that ideology. Sorry, you said that ideology is not a fan of the personal experience, and I was wondering if you felt that way across all ideological spectrums, or if it's specific to communism, and what is a politics that is predicated on personal stories?
Yeah. Actually, why I think that literature is antidote of the ideology. It's interesting that you could say politics and writers, they are populist politics. They interested in persons. They talk about fears, they work with the fears, but in a different way. What literature explores is the personal fears, personal hopes, personal sorrow, but
Yes,
it doesn't usually are not to manipulate people like the ideology is doing. And this is the difference. The common thing is that both politicians, populists, and writers, they should be good storytellers. And the problem will be when the populists are better storytellers. It will be a real problem. So we should learn to tell our stories in the same interesting way. Of course, it's easily the fake story, the conspiracy theories are more interesting. Of course, it's more interesting to say that there is something here in the air than to explain that there is nothing. But anyway, I think that this is a big battle of the storytelling now. And we should be better.
Thank you very much. Last question, please.
Hi, my name is Yuran. I'm from the Faculty of Asian and Middle Eastern Studies, and I'm from China. Actually, I discovered that my father was born in the same year as you were. So I was like, when you talk about in 1979, I was nostalgic because I was a 12-year-old boy, and I was like, yeah, I remember my father telling me, his stories of, being back in communist China, coming out from, Cultural Revolution as a 12-year-old boy, and I somehow relate about, the debate of 89, as in 1989, and my father would tell me about how he as a college student would watch on TV about like tanks going on, streets of Beijing and whatever's going on Tiananmen Square. Sorry, this is just the commentary. And I think one thing you talk about in the book is people, when there's a referendum, people choose a specific period of time, not just because what's happening, but also the future that's going to happen for that time, which you also mentioned in your commentaries. And I realized that both Time Shelter and the Physics of Sorrow are being translated into Chinese, and they're probably gonna. I read it online.
It's not still, but it will be.
Yes. So I'm wondering, how's your experience in working with the Chinese translator? Is it similar to your working relation with Angela? And how is the say, I'm not sure if it's also being translated into Arabic, Hebrew, Korean, Japanese, like non-Cyrillic or Latin scripts, languages. And I'm wondering, apparently this is more of a book to European audience, but what would you like your non-European and non-West audience, say in Far East, in the Middle East and Africa, if they're your books in their own native languages, what you would like them to think, or yes, thank you.
Yeah, actually, it's the experience that I will face now, because we have conflicts for China, Taiwan, Malayan, Indian language. But the problem is first that we don't have many, in China we have, but in other countries, we don't have many native speakers who know Bulgarian. And it's a big problem. So I think that they will translate in Taiwan, they will translate my book from English.
But that's because you don't know me, because I'm Bulgarian. My nephew is Bulgarian, but he studied Chinese in Harvard, so he can help me.
He always gets after that. Yeah, that's the problem. But thank you that you mentioned 1989, because now I realize when we are talking here how we are Eurocentric, even in Great Britain. We're thinking about 1989 in Europe, and we forgot that we had 1989 China. Yeah.
Yeah, it's not only European thing, because he mentioned it's the book about Europe, but communism is the very, very Chinese thing, dictatorship and all this. So
someone could say it's a very German thing.
It's quite common background of China and Bulgaria.
Yeah, but thank you for your, and something else that's important you mentioned, that sometimes we choose the path because of the future that we expect to live.
So you went to a lecture for in India, basically.
Yeah, I've been in India.
So how was your experience with Indian audience?
Actually, but you know better. In India, they have a big audience who follow what happens in UK. And they know about the Booker and international Booker, and they read everything that they follow what happens here and there. I met a really, really good audience, readers. It was important.
Thank you very much. I hope we have been a half as good audience. Fun for arranging the seminar this evening and the seminar series this term. Paul and Marilena for their comments, and particularly Georgi for sharing your work with us and your reflections this evening. I would encourage everyone to go out and buy the books. Thank you very much indeed again.